everyone. Welcome to our Motivation Monday videos. My name is Ariana White-Levitich, and I'm a third-year doctoral student at Old Dominion University in the Educational Psychology and Program Evaluation program. And I'm here with Matt McCrudden. He's an associate professor of education and educational psychology at Penn State University. And he's also an associate editor of Contemporary Educational Psychology, and he recently guest edited a special issue for CEP on mixed methods in educational psychology. So he's going to answer some questions for us. So let's just jump right in. Matt, so first, being that qualitative research is a broad term, could you talk about the types of approaches that you have used in your research and give any tips on how to design these studies?
Sure. Yep. Thanks, Ariana, for the invitation to participate. So when I use qualitative research, I usually use these approaches in the context of mixed methods research design. So that is, I typically use qualitative and quantitative approaches together and then integrate them. So one way that I've used qualitative research is to explain experimental findings. So the logic underlying an experiment and the use of inferential statistics is that you compare means to determine if there are differences between groups, okay? So do the groups differ on some outcome measure? So this is a product, but to understand the process or the experience from the participants' perspectives, qualitative research can be very valuable. So one way it is valuable is it can help you explain an outcome from a participant's perspective. So it helps you answer the question, maybe, why did something work? Another way it is valuable is that data at the group level does not necessarily reflect data at the level of the individual. So qualitative data can be valuable to understanding perspectives that reflect group patterns, but also perspectives that differ from group patterns. So this can be useful for improving intervention, for example. And the second part of your question is about tips. Number one thing I would say is, and this is in the context of mixed method research, be sure to integrate the quantitative and qualitative strands at different phases of the research process. So for example, I did a study with a master's student who was investigating the social validity of an intervention for children with autism. Specifically, we used a convergent design. So essentially, when an intervention has social validity, parents are more motivated to continue the intervention after the researcher is no longer there. And that could also be for teachers as well. So what we did was give parents a survey, and this was used then to collect the quantitative data. And then we interviewed the parents, but what we did was develop the interview protocol based on the survey. So this serves several purposes for us. First, it allows us to compare the quantitative survey data to previously published work that had used that instrument, but also allows us to ask questions about constructs from the survey to help us understand the depth of their thoughts and to add other ideas. So in other words, it allowed us to identify points of convergence or divergence between the two types of data. And it gave us insights that the survey alone would not have allowed. So, so back to the main idea here is that give quantitative and qualitative data equal status in the study design. Integrate the materials and instruments in a way that allows you to use different approaches to the same topic, but using different methodological traditions. And then mix the data at interpretation to find points of convergence and divergence. And I'll also add a point here. What to avoid. So there's, as indicated, here's some things you can do, here's some things that you shouldn't do. So don't use the qualitative data as an add-on to quantitative data. So some researchers refer to this as positivism and drag. So you see this when researchers use a primarily quantitative method and then add some form of qualitative data at the end of the study. Pick and choose statements that support their predictions and then provide no evidence of the validity and trustworthiness of that data. So yeah, those are the sort of in the broad context of how I use qualitative methods and a couple of tips of what to do and what not to do.
That's perfect. Thank you. So what, sort of carrying through that question, what qualitative methods do you see as particularly well suited for motivation research specifically? And what are some understudied areas of research that could benefit in particular from use of qualitative designs?
I'd say that I think that interviews and think aloud data are particularly well suited for motivation research. I understand the value of questionnaires and motivation research, but like all methods, questionnaires have limitations, as do interviews, of course. But interviews can provide researchers depth behind participants' motivations, as can moment-by-moment thoughts, which can capture with think alouds that participants have while they are performing a task with respect to motivation. So from that, I'll sort of hop on and I thought about some possible understudied areas of research that could benefit from qualitative approaches. So I'm going to lay this out since it's for a grad student SIG. I laid out 3 basic ideas that I think that would be accessible to most graduate students as far as straightforward studies to take. So the first idea is to take any motivation scale and do a think aloud to check for common interpretations of the language among participants. So how are participants interpreting those items? Do they interpret them similarly? Do their interpretations have face validity with the theory underlying the item? So that would be the first approach I would take. And Tim Erdan has a piece in Journal of Ed Psych. It was Erdan and Mestis 2006, where they tackle some of these. They don't use a think aloud approach, but that whole idea of convergence and divergence between participants' interpretations of items. Okay, the second idea, again, take any motivation scale, identify students who score high or low on that scale and interview a subsample of them. So let's say it's a self-efficacy scale. Why might students who score higher or lower differ? If one student indicates low efficacy due to lack of mastery experience, ask what those mastery experiences involved or what they entailed. Do some sources compensate for other sources? So a student may have negative mastery experiences, but have vicarious experiences that support their motivation. So thinking broadly about motivation and how different factors independently and interactively influence that motivation. So again, another name of someone who's doing work in this area is Ellen Usher, among others as well, but that's just one leaping off point for folks. The third idea is that there is not enough work with underrepresented populations. There's a tendency for us to treat underrepresented groups as a categorical variable to be controlled for in a path analysis or structural equation model. Most motivation questionnaires are normed on white students from middle-class backgrounds. So I think it's important to look at other groups. And an example of someone who's doing that is Revathi Kumar. I believe she's at Toledo. She recently published a study on this, and they developed their questionnaires by first beginning with focus group interviews with the students, and then developed the developed the questionnaire items based on their interactions with the students.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. So how do you recommend, once we've done these wonderful steps that you've recommended to us, how do you recommend that we then communicate our results so that the added value of qualitative research is really portrayed and not overshadowed if we're in the context of a mixed methods study and we're also presenting quantitative?
Well, this goes back to the study design, and you need to make sure you ask the question, how do you treat the qualitative data? And so is it going to be sort of an add-on? Then it sort of takes the diminished value and maybe doesn't have the same level of credibility. So making sure that you think about what role does the qualitative data play in relation to the quantitative data, and to what extent are you going to integrate the two of them to help you get a better understanding of the topic that you're studying and that you're interested in. And I'll also provide 3 other tips along those lines. When I'm in particular in motivation research, what I see, well, this isn't just motivation research, but when coming from an ed psych background, most programs prepare people for a quantitative, most students have a quantitative preparation. And so we see evidence of reliability and validity in quantitative measures, but I oftentimes don't see those same types of forms of evidence for validity and trustworthiness in the qualitative data. So there are things that people can do to enhance the validity and trustworthiness of that qualitative data. For example, having an external audit, or using low inference terms to communicate themes. So there's lots of different approach, having member checking, where you go back to the participants and say, do you have anything you'd like to add to this? Is this an accurate summary of what you've said? Those are types of things you can do to enhance the validity of the findings. The other thing I would do, I'd recommend to students, or researchers in general, is make the qualitative data analysis transparent. So it's oftentimes when I'll read an article or even a manuscript, and the qualitative analysis will be described in like a paragraph. Well, how did you go from raw data in the form of, let's say, interviews or some sort of text, all the way to themes? So make that process transparent, how you go from, let's say, transcriptions to meaningful statements to codes to categories and all the way up to your theme. So make sure that that's transparent. And the last thing I would add here is that I encourage people to use a visual display of some sort or a table to show the themes, and then make sure that you're providing direct quotes or verbatim quotes from the participants to help support those themes and illustrate those themes as well, so that a person can get a straightforward snapshot of your summary of what you've seen in those data.
Those are all great. Thank you. Those are our 3 questions. Is there anything else that you would like to add as a message to our students? Any other recommendations that didn't fit into the questions?
Well, I just say it takes time to develop expertise and proficiency in multiple areas. So read as much as you can, interact with other people, and look for exemplar models. That's one of the reasons I'm providing you examples of like Erdan and Usher and Kumar, just so you can see it's helpful to look at what people in the field are doing. So I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to the students here.
Thank you so much for being here.